So hello and good afternoon. I think it's morning for some of us. Hi, Dana. And welcome to our webinar about the U.S. National Strategy on Food Loss and Waste and Recycling Organics. My name is Alon Shipon, and I'll be moderating this session. I'm a faculty and member at the Department of Environmental Studies at the Porter School of the Environment and Earth Sciences at Tel Aviv University. And my research focuses on understanding food systems in Israel and worldwide. I'm also the co-founder and chairperson of the Israeli Forum for Sustainable Nutrition, which is a nonprofit organization working to advance a healthy and sustainable food system in Israel. First and foremost, I would like to thank Diana Ross for suggesting and leading this unique webinar, which is coordinated by Israeli Forum for Sustainable Nutrition in partnership with various organizations, including the Porter School for the Environment and Earth Sciences, in which both of Diana Ross and Raziel are students. The issue of food waste and food loss is of utmost importance in the discourse about sustainable food systems. The purpose of this webinar is to present a recent strategic master plan in the US, discuss its strengths and weaknesses, and explore possible avenues for implementing a strategic plan in Israel. We have a great lineup of speakers who will guide us through this. In the first session, Diana Ross and Raziel are going to present the strategic master plan. Afterwards, Dana Gunders from ReFed is going to go deeper and guide us through that strategic plan and tell us a little bit more about it. Unfortunately, the last speaker, Gidi Krog, had to cancel. He's the CEO of Leked, and due to illness, he will not be able to present. So at this point, we will just open it to a roundtable of discussion and try to think of ways of implementing this in Israel. There's a lot of experts here in the audience that I've just seen that will certainly have good questions and ideas of how to move forward here in the context of Israel. So I think without further ado, we'll start with our first speakers, Diana Ross Blives and Raziel Hernandez. Let me just remove my spotlight. Diana Ross is on a mission to catalyze a sustainable future that integrates systems of food, water, energy, waste, and community. Her journey into sustainable initiatives in a professional setting began when she served as the undergraduate representative at Georgia Tech University Center for Sustainable Business. She graduated with a degree in business and a concentration in management information system. After graduation, she was selected for a leadership development program at Cox Automotive, serving on both the Intelligent Automation Team and the Zero Waste Council. Prior to moving to Israel, Diana Ross worked as a solutions consultant at Symphony AI, helping grocery retailers optimize their supply chains and reduce food waste with technologies such as AI-driven demand forecasting. Outside of work, she co-chaired the education committee for the Illinois Food Scrap and Composting Coalition, where she developed guidelines for establishing composting programs in multi-unit buildings and launched a successful program in her own building. Diana Ross will soon complete a master's in environmental studies at Tel Aviv University. She is currently interning with a sustainability department at the Jerusalem municipality, where she helps manage an EU-sponsored program that promotes city-to-city sharing of best practices, enabling cities to achieve measurable operational results. Diana Ross,
thanks.
The stage is yours.
Amazing. Thanks so much. Let me go ahead and share this slide just to talk you through. I want to thank Alon for helping to make this happen, as well as Israeli Forum on Sustainable Nutrition, Tel Aviv University, and our panelists. So thank you. And before beginning and covering the background on the plan, I wanted to clarify two terms that come up. The first is food loss, and that is food that's produced for human consumption that leaves the human food supply chain for any reason, but it's not consumed by humans and that's between production and then up to, but not including the retail sector. And the second one that we'll talk about is food waste, and that's food that leaves the human food supply chain for any reason at all at the retail, food service, or household sector. So together, food loss and waste represent significant global challenge, with approximately 1/3 of food waste produced by weight lost or wasted from farm to fork. That's huge. And this inefficiency not only contributes to environmental damage, but also food insecurity and economic losses. So on the environmental side, food loss and waste accounts for an estimated 8 to 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And if food waste were a country, it would be the world's third largest emitter of greenhouse gases after China and the US. Meanwhile, in 2022, nearly 30% of the global population faced moderate or severe food insecurity, underscoring the large gap between food availability and food accessibility. And then economically, food waste resulted in $1 trillion of losses annually. So the question is, where do we go from here? And developing a national strategy is key. It provides a framework to align public policies, farming practices, government and private sector actions, and consumer behavior towards a common goal. Today, we'll dive in to the US's newly released National Strategy on Food Loss and Waste and Organics Recycling, and discuss the development of a similar national strategy in Israel, exploring questions like what lessons can Israel learn from the US and what steps are needed to create a national strategy here in Israel. First, we'll start by sharing some background on the US national strategy. So this past June, Tom Vilsack, the US Secretary of Agriculture, announced the US national strategy at ReFed's annual conference. This strategy was created in collaboration with the US Environmental Protection Agency, otherwise known as the EPA, the United States Department of Agriculture, the USDA, and the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, working closely with public and private sector partners. They have a formal interagency agreement to synchronize their efforts, and this strategy serves as an accountability document to help strengthen their collaboration efforts. Back in 2015, the EPA and the USDA set an ambitious goal to reduce food loss and waste by 50% by 2030. By 2021, this goal aligned to the UN Sustainable Development Goal, target 12.3, which aims to halve global food waste at the retail and consumer level and reduce food losses along production and supply chains by 2030. The strategy also includes recycling food and other organic waste through methods such as composting, rendering, and anaerobic digestion. For these efforts, they support the USDA's Climate Smart Agriculture and Forestry Strategy and the US Methane Emissions Reduction Plan by diverting food waste from landfills, which is responsible for 58% of landfill methane emissions in the US. This US strategy aims to build a more circular economy, and it proposes 4 main objectives. The first objective is to prevent food loss. Reducing food loss during production and distribution is critical, and there's different strategies that the US has outlined to get there. The first one is to optimize harvest, collection, storage, and distribution methods. The second one is to support food rescue initiatives and improve infrastructure. And the third one is invest in innovative technologies and policies. For example, the USDA is investing in innovations to reduce food loss and waste, or to make new products out of food scraps, including fruit cultivars with longer shelf lives, post-harvest technologies to extend shelf life, plant-derived coatings to protect fruit from frost damage before harvest, and using insect meal as animal food. Takes us to the second objective, which is to prevent food waste. And this is focused on minimizing food waste, again, at that retail, food service, and household level, where costs and environmental impacts are the highest because of all the resources it takes to get the food there. Some of the strategic actions that were outlined in the plan are focused on collecting research into date labeling, interventions, and behavioral sciences to inform food waste campaigns and incentives. And fundamental to this process is the development of a food waste measurement data model at the household level. And this model is meant to provide accurate estimations of food waste, which is really important when you're looking at tracking food waste over time and towards SDG 12.3. All of this research serves as the foundation to launch one national consumer education campaign to prevent wasted food. And it's aimed at households, which can then be customized to fit individual or localized campaigns. Another action that's being taken is to partner with the private sector to find upstream solutions to consumer food waste. For example, successful efforts in other countries have included changes to packaging design, marketing promotions, and portion sizes, and standardizing food date labeling. I'm going to turn it over to Raziel to go through our third and fourth objective and wrap things up.
All right. In the third objective, we have an increase in recycling rate for organic waste. The focus in this section is to boost the recycling rate for all organic waste to create a circular economy and reduce landfill methane emissions. Some strategic actions in this objective is to develop additional organics recycling infrastructure for all communities, especially ones that are underdeserved. To enable this, there's a large emphasis on removing the access barriers, including funding through grants, technical assistance support, and educational programs. Another action in this objective is to expand markets for products made from recycled organic waste. For example, they are investigating different applications for biochar and the value of compost for non-agricultural purposes. The strategy also looks to support decentralized recycling efforts to promote community investment, job creation, and reduction of burden on centralized infrastructure, and build and share tools for infrastructure investment and waste management policy making. For example, the EPA released the food waste scale in their report last year, which is a tool that ranks wasted food management methods based on their environmental impacts and contribution to a circular economy. And lastly, this objective seeks to address contamination in organic waste recycling streams. The fourth objective of this strategy is to support policies for preventing food loss and waste and increasing recycling of organics. The focus in this area is more on encouraging policies that promote food loss and waste prevention and organic recycling at all government levels. Their main point here is to support international and domestic policymakers aiming to build more circular economies by providing expertise, best practices, sharing, and technical assistance. This can include pay-as-you-throw programs or landfill bans on organic materials. And some of the specific policies are yet to be defined, but in 2021 alone, 25 US states introduced food legislation. So there's a clear progress being made in efforts to keep organic waste out of landfills. Now, there's a lot of Israel Foods Waste initiatives that align very well with the framework provided by the US strategy, with various stakeholders actively involved. We wanted to highlight this by recapping the objectives and sort of talking about the relevance of these objectives to Israel's efforts. The first objective, of course, in preventing food loss. We talked about for the US in investing in innovative technologies and policies. And as you guys know, Israel is known for the startup nation, and it also has a lot of innovative food loss and waste prevention technologies in these same areas. Where there's an opportunity for improvement for Israel is more on the policy side, which will be interesting to unpack later. For objective 2, we talked about preventing food loss where the current efforts are focused on collecting research into date labeling, interventions, and behavioral science to inform food waste campaigns and incentives in the US. In Israel, on the other hand, Leket is currently collecting their food waste measurements with a model, but there's a large opportunity for Israel to do research in food waste drivers. And objective 3, we have prevention, we have an increase on organics recycling. And when we talked about addressing contamination in organics waste recycling streams, we see that this is a worldwide problem, that the contamination of organic waste streams with plastics and PFAS are significant global challenges that hinder effective organics recycling. And in the last objective, which talks about supporting policies to prevent food loss and waste and increase organics recycling, we said that their focus is to encourage policies that promote food loss and waste prevention. For example, there's a push for Israel to pass a law that requires food businesses to donate safe surplus food to food donation organizations to donate or alternatively core it for animal feed if the food is no longer fit for human consumption. And there has also been proposed a couple of food donation requirements with a organic waste ban or tax. But the main takeaway that we want to convey today is that these actions exemplify how Israel is already making progress towards the foundation of a national strategy. Like the US strategy, Israel is creating a national strategy is important because it creates a roadmap to work on these policies and unite all efforts across institutions, businesses, and other stakeholders to drive measurable change in the reduction of food loss and waste and increase organic recycling. And we see that through these efforts, significant environmental, economic, and social benefits can contribute to a more sustainable food system.
Thank you so much, Raziel. I forgot to introduce you, and maybe I should say a few words about you just so that people here can know who you are. So Raziel is a chemical engineer with international experience spanning Panama, the US, and Israel. Inspired by the urgent need to address the challenges posed by the water-food-energy nexus and its impact on the environment, her mission centers on tackling the environmental repercussions of food waste and wastewater treatment research. She's currently enrolled in the Environmental Studies Master Program at Tel Aviv University and interning at the Natural Step Israel, where she helped promote sustainable food systems with a focus on food waste prevention. She's also working in Dr. Ines Zucker's lab, where she contributes to identifying promising nanomaterials application to solve complex problems. By combining her technical expertise, passion for sustainability, and dedication to interdisciplinary collaboration, she strives to be a catalyst for sustainable change, driving innovative solutions to environmental challenges worldwide. Thank you so much, both of you. Moving on to our next speaker, Dana Gunders. Thank you, Dana, for joining us. Dana Gunders serves as Executive Director of ReFed, a US-based nonprofit working to end food loss and waste across the food system. Deemed the woman who helped start the waste-free movement by Consumers Report, Dana is a national expert who has dedicated her career to helping industry, policymakers, and consumers activate solutions to reduce food waste. Her landmark 2012 report, Wasted: How America is Losing Up to 40% of its food from farm to fork to landfill, sparked a national dialogue about the consequences of food waste. And since then, she has continued to bring the issue to a wider audience through testimony before the Congress, her Waste-Free Kitchen Handbook, and appearances in media such as the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, Time Magazine, Fox News, and Teen Vogue, PBS NewsHour, and hundreds of other outlets. When not worrying about it professionally, Dana spends far too much time convincing her two young kids to eat broccoli stalks and reinventing their uneaten lunches as family dinner.
Thank you, Alon. I did that.
Dana.
Just
It's
yesterday, I took my son's uneaten lunch and made it part of dinner. So it is a regular occurrence in my household.
likewise in my. Go ahead, Dana.
Thank you all so much for the invitation. I want to start by just letting you know that I was in Israel for the first time in decades last April for my niece's bat mitzvah, actually. It was an incredible experience. And probably the one thing I came back thinking about was food. Like, it was just, the food in Israel is amazing. And I came back inspired to learn how to cook it. And I've been like hosting Israeli feasts, Israeli inspired feasts, I'll call it. At my house. So I have huge envy for the way you all get to eat on a regular basis, just by way of where you live. I will also say one thing that, pretty early on happened. We were a group of 18 people. And, we'd go to a restaurant and we'd sit down and they would bring out all of these incredible salads and this fresh bread. And then we'd eat and we'd be so happy. And then they'd come up to us and they would say, okay, what would you like to order? And we would be like, wait, this wasn't the meal, and then we'd of course feel like we had to order something. And it sort of presented this challenge of how do you, and then at the end of the meal, we'd have all this food left on the table. And of course, we were traveling, so not great places to keep it, but we would have it packed up. And then we had a couple nights where we just hung out in the hotel and basically ate our leftovers from all the other meals that we had had. But it was, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about that experience because, of course, the way you go about addressing food loss and waste is so culturally, it so has to be within the cultural context. Because food is so cultural. And so, anyways, as Alon said, my name is Dana Gunders. I'm the executive director at ReFed. We are a national, primarily domestic to the US, national organization entirely focused on reducing food loss and waste. And we do that through a variety of methods. One is providing data and insights on the topic. We also work with investors and foundations and increasingly public funding to help catalyze more money into the space and then match that with the places that are the best fit for that money. We have launched in the last year or so a business initiative. So we work with the private sector. In some ways, we've been working with the private sector for many years. So we do two things. We have like independent one-on-one, essentially consulting type of relationships with food companies. And then we also host a multi-business pre-competitive platform that in the food waste world, they've started to call them voluntary agreements, where you get a lot of the industry together to work on this problem collaboratively. And so we host something like that on the West Coast. And then we just in December launched a national version of that. And we have a lot of the major grocers and also food service companies that are participating. And then we play a convening role. So we bring together people who work on this for an annual summit that just happened in June. And that is where Secretary Vilsack launched this strategy, which was incredibly exciting. And on the policy side, we are part of something that we started last year called the Zero Food Waste Coalition. So we don't do our own policy work. We do a lot of analysis that we try to help inform policy, and we track policies, but we don't go and lobby in DC or anything like that. So that's a little bit about who we are. I think, I was asked to kind of just give my thoughts on the US national strategy. So I will start there. The first thing that I will say is I don't really think this is a strategy. I think it's a little bit of a misnomer. Like if you stop, I have, it's a 50-page document, and it really what it is kind of a smattering of a bunch of stuff that was already happening and a few new things in there. What it doesn't do, that if I were gonna, start from scratch like you guys are, what it doesn't do is say, okay, here's the picture. Here's where the biggest chunks are. Let's go after the biggest chunks. And that, to me, that's a strategy, right? You go, you analyze the problem, and then you learn from that, and you say, let's go after the biggest stuff. Where can we make the biggest dent first, or what can we do first? For me, that's what's missing here. That doesn't mean it doesn't do anything, but I think if I were going to start from scratch, that's where I would want to start. So, and I can show you a little bit more if we have time of our data to give you a sense of what a little bit more of how I might direct things if I were going to do it that way. Having said that, I think, and I point blank was on stage with Secretary Vilsack as he was launching this. And I said, look, there's a lot of stuff in here that you guys were already doing. So what are we supposed to think about it now being in this strategy? Does that change anything? And to give you a sense of what they're already doing, a lot of the things in this strategy are grant programs, business support programs, farmer support programs that exist, and they are a broad umbrella for something. So there's like a small business innovation grant, right? There's a agricultural marketing grant. And sure, you could support food loss and waste as part of that, or you could not, right? And so I think by having those programs that already existed in the strategy, what I'm hoping that it does, and what Secretary Vilsack said was, by being in the strategy, it helps to give this topic priority. And so hopefully what's going to happen is that in all of these programs that are existing that could or could not support food loss and waste, that they actually will have at least a component of them that is a little bit more focused on supporting food loss and waste. I think from a political standpoint, the including things that are already happening helps to get the government on board in general, right? If everything they have to do is create new stuff, it feels like a big lift. If you can go and say, hey, you already have these 10 things that you're doing, you just need to, focus a little more on this or tweak this, that can be helpful just politically for getting interest and getting things over the finish line. So, some of the private sector things they mentioned in here are really things that like they're not doing, we're doing, and maybe they've given a little bit of money to here and there. But if they want to count that, and that helps get a strategy out there, and it helps get the White House saying, yes, we support this. And, it kind of has a nuanced political benefit to it all. As was mentioned, there are some new things in here as well. So point one is kind of existing programs that you can find that could be part of this, I think are helpful to include, even though it doesn't feel like you're changing the world by including them. I think it can help increase priority within those, at least here. Point two is there are some new things in the strategy. One that was mentioned and probably I'm most excited about is the consumer or the consumer strategy and efforts in there. So there are a couple things that talk about trying to identify the best messaging, do research, kind of behavioral research on interventions and which are most effective. And then there is commitment to a national education campaign that EPA says they will launch. When I read that, I get very excited. I've been trying to have, I've been working on trying to get that to happen for 10 years. I actually ran a national consumer education campaign in my former job in partnership with a big marketing group here called the Ad Council. And when I did that with the Ad Council, which does a lot of donated media, we had over 2 years, $110 million worth of donated media. And that sounds like a big number. And what I can tell you is it did not change the world. So when I look at the EPA and them saying they're going to launch a consumer education campaign, I say, super exciting. That's great. How much funding are you going to put into this? Because that could mean everything from them putting some PDFs up on their website to them putting, the hiring staff, putting millions of dollars with it, partnering with the ad council, which is kind of what you have to do here to really run a big campaign. So what I want to know, and what I would ask if somebody else was developing a strategy in Israel, for instance, is how much money are you going to do it? Are you going to put into it? Are you going to do that for an extended period of time? Because what I learned doing the first campaign is you can't run a behavioral change campaign for 2 years. Like the places where we've seen success with these campaigns in the UK and the Netherlands, the UK has been running a campaign for like 15 years. So, and they've reduced consumer waste by 30%, but these things take a little bit of time to really like infiltrate the culture. So that's another learning, is like, what I want to see is a multi-year commitment to funding a campaign. And I want to see what that minimum level of funding commitment is. And I also want to know when they're going to do it. Of course, politics here makes it hard for anyone to commit to anything before November right now. So that is another learning. Exciting to see. I want to see funding. I want to see a timeline. I do appreciate the division of food loss, food waste, and then recycling. I think that is a useful frame for people who don't work on this day in and day out, to really look at what's happening, on farm, what's happening in the later consumer stages. It is such a different problem in those two places. I think one thing that I don't see really strongly in here is it is a system, right? And a lot of what the grocers are doing is manifesting as waste on the farms, and the farmers can't really fix that. The grocers need to fix it. So I think some nod to more systemic collaboration and maybe some funding of full value chain analyses would be pretty helpful as well. The other thing this is missing for me is any kind of report out. So one thing I would love to see is kind of an annual analysis report that goes through and says, okay, what did we do for each of these things? And I think that's specifically important for instance, the grant programs that may or may not actually contribute to this problem. It's like, I want to see, okay, you said this was part of your strategy. Now, how much what did you do last year? How much actually went into this through each of these grant programs last year? So what else? I think that they do commit to some tool building. They don't really commit to annual measurement. So that's another, if I were in a place like Israel, where I think, being so much smaller, it feels possible to do annual measurement. I mean, we do annual estimates of food waste. It's very complicated. The USDA, our government, we don't wait for our government to do that, because it takes them so long. They come out with a new estimate basically every 10 years or so. So the fact that that measurement is not in this strategy doesn't bother me. I mean, I wish it was, but I also know how they operate, and they're on such a lag, and things take so long that I don't think it's realistic. I think if in another place it could be realistic, it would be really nice to see a part of a strategy that is, we are going to measure this, we're going to measure our progress, we're going to be, put more resources into that. And yeah, I mean, I think that, I guess one last thing I'll say is, Raziel mentioned composting and the strategy on that side of things. One thing that we are seeing overall is that the strategy for addressing climate change has shifted in the last 2 years to really focus more on methane. And if you take that lens and at least in the US, landfills are the third largest source of methane, and food in those landfills is about 60% of the methane is coming from food in the landfills. So we estimate, if you just put those two numbers back of envelope together, you get that about 10% of US methane is coming from food in landfills. If you want to address that, if your goal is methane, and that's kind of, you have like methane blinders on, if you will, what you really want to do is just get the food out of the landfill, and you want to get the most of it possible, right? And so that is where composting and building out composting infrastructure becomes really important. It is expensive. And when we do a whole costing analysis, and when we look at that, like building out composting infrastructure or anaerobic digestion infrastructure, that is some of the biggest ticket items in terms of the investment needed for this topic. So we see that as a public requirement, that is a place where public funding has to come in, versus on the prevention side, we see a lot of innovation that can be funded by private investors. And then as the companies grow, it can be funded by bigger food companies actually implementing, paying to implement those options. Whereas on the composting side, it just doesn't pencil out. And that has to be public money that comes into it, because that's just the economics of it. So I think that's an important thing to remember when you're sort of looking at, if you can get funding to be part of your strategy, where does it go? You want enough on the prevention side to be able to kind of spur investment, but that can really be like a one-to-many equation. Whereas on the end, on that composting side, you really need like pretty hefty public money to match private money going in. So let me just take a moment to share a little bit of the analysis that we do, so you can kind of see maybe borrow from some of what we've done here to the extent that is useful. So we have a tool that is called the Insights Engine. It's really not a tool, it's really a compilation of 6 tools. And I'll show you like the first 2. So this food waste monitor is where we look at how do you we're trying to capture the problem. And I know these are funky charts. We call them our favorite soccer ball, but bottom line, you can kind of come in here and you can see, you can try to get a sense of what's happening, right? We call this surplus food because we don't call it waste until it's wasted. But you can see that, how much is going to landfill, compost, what's not being harvested. You could also look at it by sector and see that, the residential sector is the biggest, right? So when we talk about our strategy, look at how much of it's actually going to residential, it's pretty small relative to the fact that we estimate that almost half of the waste is happening at the residential level in households. So you can kind of come on here. This tool allows you to look at it by dollars, which is useful for policy purposes, I would say, and also media. They like to say, $250 billion are going to waste in households, that sort of thing. You can look at it through greenhouse gases. So depending on who you're talking to, really capturing, what is the greenhouse gas impact can be useful as well. And you then can drill down. So if you just want to see what's happening in food service, for instance, you can look and see just the food service total numbers. You can see it by different sectors within the food service. And what I think is particularly interesting is you can see the causes. This is, our best guess. This is a model. It's not perfect. The data is not perfect, but I think what you can see really strongly here is that most of the waste is happening kind of in that situation that I described that we experienced in Israel, it is happening on the tables at restaurants. It's not happening back in the kitchens. So a lot of the solutions that you see coming out of the startup like arena, for instance, they're looking at how do you track waste in kitchens. What that does is get at, this overproduction. It might get at the trimming a little bit. It doesn't get at the plate waste. So one thing that we're pursuing this year is really looking at what can we do with menu design and flexible portions and such that could actually start to allow people to order closer to the amount of food they want. And the way I talk about it here in the US is we like to customize. There's a big move towards customization, and we have Chipotle is a big chain here that has, a burrito shop where you go in and you tell them exactly what you want on your burrito. And you can customize exactly how you want it, except the size, right? You have to still get a massive burrito. So what I'm after is like, I want a second option that is a smaller burrito so that you can really also customize your size, and that could lead to less plate waste. And similar things like that around the restaurant industry. I won't get into all the kind of details of all this, but that is one thing that we're trying to make available. All of that information then goes into feeds into this analysis, which is more about solutions. And so we've analyzed about 42 solutions to food waste. They're everything from prevention to food donation to recycling and composting, different ways to do that. And for each solution, we look at, well, how much food does it save? How much does it cost to implement? How much money might it save or bring in? And also, what are the climate impacts? We also look at meals, we look at jobs. So you can come on this, and if you care about climate, you can find this ordered by climate. If you care about tons of food waste because you're a city trying to just deal with the tons, you can do it by that. If you care about, meals, you can order it that way. And then you can filter to all these different things. And you can go in and see what we also like, kind of a more specific analysis where we think the money should come from. So we have 9 different types of capital that we estimate where, like, who should be paying for this one. So you can see that for consumer education campaigns, we think that's primarily a government cost. But there are others where you'll see we estimate it should be really private. So yeah, we try to bring these together in different ways. We don't yet have that kind of analysis for the government that would be my answer to the strategy, but it's something that we're thinking about doing to really kind of put that government filter on and come out with that. One last thing I'll show you here, well, maybe 2 last things. One is, this might be useful for you. It's an impact calculator. So if you, for instance, wanted to suggest that Israel have an organic waste ban and fully compost everything, what you could do, now there's a little bit of US assumptions in here, but you could come in here, you pick a sector, and you say, okay, right now, we have 10,000 tons of food going to landfill. If we were to compost that, here's what the difference would be. And it sort of very quickly allows you to estimate the benefit of, different destinations for the surplus food that you have. So that may be useful to you all as you develop what you're doing. The other thing we have is a policy finder. So if you want to look at policies, you can come in here and kind of see, you can see what the policies are state by state and what we think are strong policies. So, California has a strong policy. You can click into California and you can actually see what policy that is. I will just show you one other, sorry, I didn't load this up. ahead of time, but as I mentioned, we're part of a policy coalition. So as you think about policies, these may be useful. Specifically, we do have thoughts on federal that's mostly focused on our farm bill right now. I actually think what might be most interesting to you is our state toolkit. In the US, a lot of the policy around food waste actually happens at the state level. And so we have created a state policy toolkit, and it actually has model legislations for several different aspects of it. So we have waste ban model legislation, we have food donation model legislation, and so on. And so this might be a useful resource as you think about which policies, are most relevant for Israel, that you could come in and actually look at some of the model legislation that we've put out there to see what it does. I think with that, I will stop.
Thank you so much, Dana. The tools that you just showed are incredible. I think I'll spend some time going over them. I think it will provide a lot of inspiration. Thank you so much for this session. I think there are some people who want to ask some questions, and I just suggest that we turn this into a round table so people can ask questions maybe they have for some of the speakers. And I think that we can gradually turn this into a round table where people can also suggest ideas, talk, not only ask questions. So if anyone has any specific questions, just raise your hand and I'll try to direct the speakers, direct the questions to the speakers. Shmuel, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Shmuel Yerushalmi. Very interesting presentations. And I have a question. I think Dana can to answer to my question. I want to ask you how this U.S. national strategy can support resolution problems of poverty and food insecurity.
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, so I have two levels of answer to that question. One is solving food insecurity, as I think you just alluded to, means you can't solve food insecurity if you don't solve the root causes of it, and that is poverty, inequality, and things like that. So I don't see that things like food donations solve that. They are more of a band-aid when we talk about them as providing food to the emergency food system, but not solving food insecurity, right? It's a temporary food provision. It's not a fundamental solution. So I don't think there's much in here that solves poverty. But there is a lot in the strategy that that adds food into the food donation system. There are programs in here that already exist, or this falls into the things that already exist, but that buy extra food that farmers have from them, and essentially give it to the food banks that are here. So that is a program that's in there. There are like some of the small business grants. There's a lot of thought being given to, can we provide like boxes of fresh food to lower income people who are food insecure, and provide it in a way that it will actually get used, but also encourage more nutrition and more consumption of fruits and vegetables. And that is kind of in here in certain places as well. So I would say, and then the US already has a pretty strong legislative, we have some strong laws. So one, we have a pretty strong liability protection for food donations. So anyone who donates food is protected from liability. And the other thing is we do have tax incentives that encourage food donations. So through all of that, there is additional food into that system.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the speakers? Anyone want to start?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, who is that? It's just-
Yasmin, yeah, there are a lot of people at it.
Yeah, go ahead, Yasmin.
Thank you. So my question is for Dana. First of all, it was so interesting to see your perspective, and the tools that you just presented are amazing and extremely useful. And I was wondering a little bit about the process of the data collection. Is it data that you collected? Is it where, I mean, as you also mentioned, measurement is such a big issue, and it's such a difficult it's such a challenge when looking at food waste and food loss. And I was wondering where the data comes from, how you collect it, and just if you can explain a little bit about that.
Sorry. Yeah. So we have a very complex model that collects it. We have over 80 data sets that go in. We have an analysis. It's like each solution you see is basically its own little mini model that goes into it. So it's pretty complicated, but I don't want that to be scary. So the general, and we are trying to, I will say, we're trying to think about how can we enable other countries to basically put their data into our model and spit out an analysis that looks like that for another country. So, you know, if that becomes interesting, we should talk about that. But basically essentially what we do, to oversimplify, is we take the amount of food that gets sold and we say, okay, if, you know, we have national data sets on pretty good data sets on how much food is sold. And so we take that data and we say, okay, we know $100 million worth of strawberries were sold. And from some academic study, or maybe we're collecting data somewhere, we know that about 5% of strawberries go to waste at the grocery store. And so we'll take that 100 million and we'll apply 5% to it. And we'll say, okay, we think that, you know, $5 million worth of strawberries are going sold, and we'll translate that into weight. And we basically do that for hundreds of products. Now, of course, we don't have that information for every single product. We might only know it for dairy, right? And we are just applying it to all of dairy or something. And depending on the sector, we have better information. Some sectors, it's changing every year. We're actually able to change those like 5% assumptions. Other sectors, we just have an academic study that was done once on farms, and it said about, you know, 10% of broccoli is left on the field, and we just kind of use that because we don't have anything better. So yeah, it's pretty complicated, but I don't know that it has to be. I think different countries are using different methods to try to estimate things. And I'm sorry, but I'm not familiar like how much Israel has done on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. I have a question here from someone who, could you expand a little bit about the Farm Bill? How does the Farm Bill help or hurt the strategy? What would you suggest should change in the Farm Bill to support a change in tackling food waste?
Well, that's like, we need another hour for that question. And I imagine most of you are not involved and are not very knowledgeable about the Farm Bill, which would put you in line with 99.9% of Americans. So the Farm Bill does like two really big things and then hundreds of other smaller things. The two big things it does is it provides subsidies to commodity farmers here in the US. And then the other big thing it does is it pays for food stamps, which are like food assistance to food insecure people. Those are the two things it does. And it creates weird, like there's huge fights. It's a whole thing. So the problem is it subsidizes a lot of commodity crops. So like if you just look at the baseline of the Farm Bill, it's interesting because on one hand, by providing all these subsidies to farmers, you're artificially lowering the cost of food, and that makes it more attractive to waste, right? And so by providing subsidies, it's really increasing waste. On the other hand, food stamps are a way, in my opinion, to actually design a system where you're not just feeding low-income people food that is like after the fact, it's about to go to waste. No, we'll feed it to somebody, but you're actually giving them choice and allowing them to purchase food. So, it's kind of too big a question to answer right now. One of the really immediate things we're looking for is just for the government to have an office of food loss and waste. So we're hoping that in the Farm Bill, we can actually get them to commit to an office within the Department of Agriculture that is entirely focused on food loss and waste.
Thank you so much, Dana. I know your time is limited, and so if you need to jump off, we appreciate your time, and thank you for this talk. You're more than welcome to stay around if you want to. I know that people have a lot to discuss and talk, and we could really open it to a roundtable of discussions. So anyone who's interested in comments in bringing some of this lessons that we just discussed into the Israeli context, we're very much welcome to hear you.
Alon,
I do have another thing, so I'll sign off.
Dana, I have another question for you before you leave.
Yeah.
If we choose you to the Minister of Food Waste in the next administration, what would be the 3 major things you think you would want to promote first?
I think composting infrastructure, like a waste ban, is very effective because it not only gets food out of the landfill, but it separates it to a different stream, and then you can weigh it, you can measure it more easily. People can see it, right? So I think it has other benefits that we don't think about. So that would be one. I think in Israel, I mean, again, my limited experience, but I do think plate waste in restaurants is something that you might want to look at and consider. Like, it's complicated, it's not straightforward, but that would be important. And if you don't already, I guess one thing I don't know is how much of the food is sort of through bigger companies there. But if it is a significant portion, I think the agreement, the private sector program that we've had seems to be really successful in driving action there. So that'd be my third.
Thank you so much, Dana.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you. Okay. So who's next?
I have a comment. I know that there's some folks from the Illinois Food Scrap and Composting Coalition that are also on, which is exciting, and it's an organization that's dear to my heart. And I think that what she was saying about composting is really interesting because it does, there has been the shift to focusing on methane emissions, and also it is a large capital expense. I also think the unspoken benefit of composting and putting in infrastructure is that you start to realize behavior change because you're seeing how much you're actually bringing to the compost bin. And so where we're trying to drive behavior, especially in Israel at the consumer level, it does a lot to, I know just for my in-laws, they're wonderful. And when I moved in with them COVID times, I gave them a whole presentation on like, okay, I'm going to build you a compost bin and we're going to compost and this is what we're going to do. And they continued to do it after we left because they realized how much food they were actually throwing away, and they started to drive their behavior change and drove it down. They're like, it doesn't belong in the trash can. Like, we're going to bring it outside. So anyways, I think it's a great way to drive behavior change, implementing composting program.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I don't know, I know in Jerusalem, there's a lot of infrastructure for it. I'm not as familiar, like in Tel Aviv, I know that there's different sites where you can bring food scraps to, but I don't know, and I don't know if somebody on this call does, if we're at any kind of a bigger level, like focused on composting.
Anyone want to answer that question?
Hello, yes, my name is Hannah Elsana. I'm from Sadr organization in the Negev, a Bedouin women organization. I want to say that to add to what Dina said, that the compost is a very good way, like, to start with. We just started an agricultural project, a pilot project started 2 years ago, and we built a cooperative. It was the first agricultural cooperative for Bedouin women in the Negev. And one of the training was how to make organic compost out of the food, the waste food. And we just found out that it was hugely successful, because like the amount of food that we collected and made organic compost for our gardens was much more than we expected. And the women just started actually to realize how much food they were, and started, like, to save in the other hand. So we just felt that we actually developing, like, helping the women in making their organic compost for their own gardens, and at the same time trying to make behavior, and this just come out as well in behavioral change at the same time. So this is like our experience from the Negev to add to this webinar. I just want to thank you. I just want to say as well, like, just hearing this discussion, I'm just thinking that it's great to have national strategies, but is there any thought about the need in the Negev, for example, is completely different from Tel Aviv, and there is a great need to have this regional strategies based on the need of people, based on what's happening actually on that region. And is there, like, Dana also said that there is insufficient figures, insufficient data. We don't have, like, there is a lack of studies, data that could provide any basic for, like, starting any campaigns or interventions in this area. So is there, like, any type of support, any type of, like, thinking about regional strategies for specific areas rather than just thinking about national strategies?
I think that's a very important point. This kind of tension between the national and regional strategies. Each region has its own kind of unique patterns of cultures and way of going about things. And I think this kind of, I think it's very important. And maybe just to answer the question that was before, I think, Diana Ross, the municipality of Emek Hefer, for example, does composting on a municipality level. So they have the brown kind of composting trash cans that was installed in some places in Israel, but was unsuccessful. And I know that in this municipality, it's been going on for years. I don't know more details on how successful it is, but it seems to me that looking at it, it seems that the communities there, which are mostly farmers and small communities of Moshavim, are very participating in this. So it seems to me like a success story, but I'm not an expert on that specific municipality. If anyone else has more information, please go ahead.
I can tell you, Diana Ross, you were asking about Tel Aviv. So it's true, it's a local activity. I will tell you about two projects. One is Lira Shapira, which is a community garden that the citizens, the people from Shapira, is bringing their leftover or the composting for composting. They measure the weight of the leftover that they are bringing, and according to the weight, they get like money to that they can use only in Shapira's restaurants or buying fresh food from the local community garden. So it's like closing this issue with economical model.
Mhm.
And the city on the city level, there are few community refrigerators. For example, here in north of Tel Aviv, which you won't think about this neighborhood as poor neighborhood, but we have a place where volunteers are collecting leftover from private restaurants or businesses, and they put it in the refrigerator, and over there the people are coming and collecting for their homes. So these are two activities, and in this project, the Tel Aviv municipality is participating. They are paying the electricity needed. They are supporting this activity in different places.
Okay, thank you, Galia. Anyone else wants to share any ideas?
Just wanted to comment back to what Sidra said. Is that how do you pronounce it? Sidra?
Yes, it's Sidra.
Thank you so much for sharing about the bedroom program in the Negev. I had no idea. And it's exciting to hear. And I think when it brings me to think about in the US, you have this national strategy, really important. But as Dina said, a lot of the what's happening actually at the state level. And when you talk about the regional, like the need for a regional strategy, I think is also so important. And I wonder how that would tie into, like, if I think about Israel creating this national strategy, we've talked about how we need to do a lot of the data collection, I think is a huge question mark, right? How that is going to happen and get those baseline measurements. And then at the, how do you segment it, right? Like, how do you create this national strategy, but also allow for flexibility for different regions to go about it in different ways? And how do you kind of segment it? I think is a really important question to address. I don't think it has to be one or the other. I think that they can work together.
I think that's one of the reasons why she said that it's not really a strategy, because if it would have been a strategy, it would definitely have the breakdown on the how to of where to do these action steps. But at the same time, there's a couple of programs that already deal with, for example, composting at I don't want to say regional level, but it's definitely a community level. That it's sort of more in tune with what people are doing, but it's also part of what she said on like it's already programs that had that the government had been running already for a while that just were added to the action for sure.
I'm really wondering when they were talking about the campaign to the house level, I'm wondering which campaign it will be, because is it going to be like talking about how much money you are wasting? Are you going to talk about, or what is the most effective way to convince large amount of people to change the way of thinking? Do you think it will be climate change? I don't know what can be very effective for the common people which are not from the sustainability in their sustainability path.
I think I want to add something here. I think the focus should be in both. So we work in long-term campaigns that we have long-term aims for it that could take 5-10 years. It's very important because we know that behavioral change could not be done and achieved within 3-4 months. We would love to do that, but we need to be patient and we need to understand that some campaigns, especially that focus on behavioral change, needs time. But at the same time, I think we need also to focus on prevention and to do things that could prevent the things that are happening right now and help at the same time the behavioral change. So the focus should be in both. With a great understanding of the situation that's we are we are aware of the difficulty in changing the culture. We as a Bedouin, we waste lots of food in our weddings. We just had a wedding last week, and I can tell you that we have big meals of meat and rice, and only 2 people eat a meal that it's enough for 10 people, and all the rest of the food just go for waste. So you could imagine it is in one wedding, and we have a season with with nearly 2 to 3 weddings every week. So if we want to change this should be done with a campaign, with a focus on a changing behavior, changing culture, and this will take time. Okay, we understand that, and we need to work on that. We can't say that we need something like a magic that could change it. No, we need a plan, and the plan could work if we work on it in a good way and with a great effort, in cooperation, in working with the schools from very young age, working at university level, working with academics, professionals, communities. So just the focus should be all together. And this we know that this should this needs a big investment, and unfortunately I don't think there is a big attention and investment and interest in this field at the moment.
Thank you so much. My question to people here in the audience is focused on policy. What do you think, after Dana's talk and our kind of dive into the strategy and other thoughts that came through, what should be the policy, I would say, targets or the low-hanging fruits policies in Israel to tackle food waste? Anyone want to try and answer that or have any suggestions? It's not a question of in an exam, it's just an idea that we can brainstorm here.
Alon, I would share some thoughts first of all, from what Diana said. I think she was very frank with us and told us exactly what she thinks. The most important part is the major causes of the food waste. And you see the Farm Bill subsidizes food as a commodity, yes? And it continues to do that. So we can lead any campaigns, as she said, with a huge sum of money, yes? I think we should map the major causes in Israel, and they are quite similar. We do not subsidize the food. However, aside from the government, everyone is dealing with our plate. So I think we need to map the major forces that lead to all this huge food waste, and there is huge food waste. And I think we need to promote policy to help us, first of all, lead the real price of food. I think this will change a lot. People will buy less. Of course, when you have policy, then campaigns can help as well. So, and I would like to say just one word, as Gidi is not with us, Gidi Kroch, the CEO of Leket, and we share and we have cooperations and so on. And what Gidi shared in the last year, first of all, the huge amount of food losses because of the war. We cannot I don't know how to say, but we have to consider this as well. And just one word to appreciate what Leket is doing. So as many years Leket received a lot of fruits and vegetables from the farmers. Now, from the beginning of the war, Leket is helping the farmers also to handle all what is needed. And every day there are buses going to the farmers. I think this mutual collaboration with the farmers and appreciating what they are doing, it can help also to lower the size of the problem. So Gidi, we hope you feel good and continue this wonderful work. Thank you.
Thank you. Some other thoughts?
I just went into what Dana showed us on the ReFed website. And in the potential solutions, they have mostly what they consider the most the solution that has the most net financial benefit is reshaping consumer behavior. And I think this is the third time so far during this webinar that kind of makes me think of a couple of suggestions that I've previously seen in Foodways. Always shaping their retail environment. It's definitely one of the biggest ones because most people, when they go to supermarkets, they are either in this very they don't have the customs of, for example, doing the list, or they see a sale, and even though they don't need it, they're probably pick it up. And these are the kind of things that when you don't plant your food, when you don't have an organized schedule for your cooking, a lot of food ends up being thrown out. Particularly the case of countries that have had metrics in food waste, for example, the UK and the Netherlands, which is something that Dana mentioned as well, that a lot of the food waste happens at this part of the planning, the retail environment. And I think the biggest opportunity for policy is right there in the retail environment. And I know there's a lot of research that in Europe that they have been trying to do in order to check change the tags, the way that people shop, in order to trigger logical systems for people to think about if whether they need it or not. But I definitely think it's one of the most interesting parts of food waste, how to change the retail environment so people can have a lot more or less wasteful practices.
I can share with you about the policy in Switzerland, in one of the biggest supermarket chain over there. It's forbidden to make promotion for fresh food, to buy 1+1 or 2+1. It's forbidden. You have in the entrance of the supermarket a big frigidaire for the last minute produce, which is soon will be updated, not updated,
Perished.
yes. So you can buy it in 70% discount, 70% discount. So when you want to buy something, and most of the time you buy for the immediate 2 days, so you go to this frigidaire, you collect good things in lower price. But you can buy a pasta that is with long shelf life, 1+1, but never cheese, yogurt, or whatever. This is a policy that might change the behavior while you are buying.
I do want to do a shameless plug right here because I know TNS Israel has been working on introducing dynamic pricing, which is what Galia just described. When the for example, produce have a certain limit of time on the shelf, and once it comes closer to their expiration date, the produce it gets marked down so that it doesn't end up in the landfill. Which is I was just gonna do the shameless plug of we have been trying really, really hard to introduce it to Israel. But there's a lot of variables that has made it a little bit hard. So we're just continuing on that mission, and the NROs just made a campaign for them as well on one of our classes, just to see a new strategy in introducing dynamic pricing.
Dynamic pricing is one hand. The second one, it's forbidden to promote fresh food as 1+1. So it's both a suggestion for new policy.
Okay, thank you. Any last comment? If not, I think we can end here. I'd like to thank the speakers for guiding us through this and understanding food waste and food loss in the US, and also kind of bringing us to understand some ideas about Israel. And also I'd like to thank all of you, and I hope that you'll have a very calm and peaceful night today. Thank you so much for joining us.